It's about the donut. And to me, that hits perfectly each of your lives. Each of your lives, you're going to find you have something you feel is lacking. One area where you're failing, one area where you're not perfect. But God still loves you. God still loves each of us so much that He came here just for us. He became man and walked to the cross in spite of that spot in our lives. Our text today, I don't know if this will stand. Anyways, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. Our text today with the gospel reading is that moment. That moment is God's revealing it all to His disciples, revealing what it's all about. Taking that moment, and I can't imagine being there, sitting with Him, hearing Him say these words for the first time, to take and eat. This is my body and blood. My true body and blood. And it was so significant, that idea, each of you are going to have your first taste of what communion is. Your first drink of the wine, which is Jesus' blood that was shed for you, and it is going to be so powerful in your life. You guys are being changed. You're being transformed. And many of you may be thinking, well, am I ready? And many of you out there may be thinking, am I ready? Can you imagine Christ calling you to sit down at the table with Him on the Last Supper? Can you imagine? Are you worthy? Me. Now, in all these classes we've had, you've heard lots of stories about the prophets, right? And they all sound so awesome. Moses parted the Red Sea. Elijah fed a woman and her son for months when the jar should have been empty. Each of the prophets in the Old Testament have done incredible things, but you know what? They each had a spot. Each of those prophets that we think so highly of, that came before Christ to reveal His coming, each had a spot in their own life. They weren't perfect. And I don't expect any of you 8 to be perfect either, or any of you to be perfect. You see, we lose so quickly when we hear that the prophets, we think they're so awesome. They did so many great things. But I went through and started categorizing their faults. Not something we normally do. Start with Noah. God was angry with the whole world for being sinful, and He wiped them out with one flood. Yet Noah, He saved. Noah's spot, he was a drunk. Abraham, the father of our faith, went to sacrifice his own son. He was too old. Isaac was a daydreamer. Jacob was a liar. Leah, unfortunately, she was ugly. Joseph was abused. She was. I didn't make it up. It says it clearly. She was ugly. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. Joseph, he was abused by his own brothers. Moses had a stuttering problem. Gideon was afraid. Samson was a hippie. That means he had long hair if you don't know that word. Hippie. Okay, Rahab was a prostitute. Jeremiah was too young. David had an affair. Elijah was suicidal. Isaiah preached naked. Not going to do that. Jonah ran from God. Sorry, but he does. Jonah ran from God. Naomi was a widow. Job went bankrupt. John the Baptist ate locusts. Peter, the rock, denied Christ. The disciples fell asleep while Jesus was having them pray. Don't fall asleep today, okay? Zacchaeus was too small. Paul was too religious. Timothy had an ulcer, and Lazarus, he was dead. But God used every one of them. God used every one of these people in spite of their faults, in spite of that spot that we so often overlook because they're so great, they're in the Bible. But God used every one of them. He had a purpose for each one. There's a purpose for each one of you and each one of you out there. See, I was so inspired by your words on banners. Your words, our confirmation students made these banners with assistants that you see up here on the wall. These are their banners, and I hope to see them down the road still hanging in your room. It's something to remember. Something to look towards as you continue your walk of faith, your walk with God. You always need to remember those blessings in your life. Too often we can focus on it's pouring down rain and it's miserable, and we lose sight of the blessings God has given us. Each one of you needs to remember God is blessing each of you every day. Too often we focus on a little spot and ignore the greatness of that creation. Ignore what He's done for us. And I thought so perfectly, each of these banners that you made tied in to this idea. Your perspective starts with Proverbs 1, verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. You can't start to understand God unless you read the Bible, unless you understand the fear of what we should be listening to, the Ten Commandments, what we should follow. That's where it starts. And it continues with 1 Timothy 4. Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity. That's that step today. Just because you're the youngest ones ever to be confirmed here today, you are still precious in God's eyes.